So what if the future of our species wasn't just left up to chance? Today, we're diving into how a handful of really powerful people, along with some brand new technologies, are starting to re-engineer the very act of human reproduction. We're talking about turning our own biology into a programmable system.
It really all kicks off with ideas like this one. You've got Elon Musk saying that falling birth rates are, and I quote, a much bigger risk to civilization than global warming. Just let that sink in for a second. For decades, the big, scary idea was a planet with way too many people. This quote, it's a complete 180, a radical new fear that's really taking root in places like Silicon Valley.
That's right, the entire script has just been flipped. We've gone from worrying about overpopulation to a new anxiety about, well, population collapse. And this is a story of how that fear is fueling a whole technological movement to literally build the future of humanity one baby at a time.
Okay, so how in the world did we get here? This isn't just some number on a chart dipping down. We're talking about a massive ideological shift. It's about how venture capital and just these immense personal fortunes are now being funneled directly into our biology, into the very code of what makes us human.
Now, what's so fascinating here is the contrast. The old fear, the population bomb, that was all about scarcity, right? Not enough food, not enough space, not enough resources to go around. This new fear is all about stagnation. The thinking goes that without enough young people, innovation just dries up, economies start to shrink, and society basically grinds to a halt under the weight of its own aging population.
And out of this fear, a new movement has been born, techno-pronatalism. Now, this is not your grandparents' traditional religious call to be fruitful and multiply. Nope, this is a secular, engineering-first kind of approach. It sees falling birth rates like a systemic bug that needs a software patch. It looks at the human population and sees scalable biology, something that can be optimized.
And you know, just like a lot of tech movements, this one has its pioneers. We're talking about billionaires who are treating their own family lineage almost like a startup, and they're aiming for massive, massive scale. So let's take a look at how this is actually being built right now in the real world. So who are these people? Who are the ones out there on the front lines, really stress testing the biological, the legal, and the ethical limits of reproduction? Well, let's zoom in on a couple of key examples.
First up, you have Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram. He has reportedly fathered over 100 children through sperm donation. He kind of sees it as his civic duty, to share what he considers his high-quality genetic material. And in a move that could only come from the tech world, he plans to open source his DNA data. The idea is to create a decentralized genetic network for his kids to connect with each other. It's paternity as an information system.
Then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Chinese gaming billionaire Xu Bo. His goal is much more traditional, a concentrated dynasty to secure his corporate empire. But how he does it is fascinating. He uses something called regulatory arbitrage, which is basically a fancy way of saying he shops around the globe for the most favorable laws. He outsources the pregnancies to surrogates in the United States, which not only bypasses Chinese restrictions, but also gets his heirs U.S. citizenship as a kind of legal firewall.
These individual stories are pretty wild, but they are only possible because there's a huge global industry that has essentially industrialized pregnancy itself. This is the massive logistics engine that makes this whole idea of a scalable lineage a reality.
And the numbers, they're just staggering. The global surrogacy market is projected to be worth over $200 billion in the next decade. This isn't some niche service for the ultra-rich anymore. This is a booming global industry that's turning the act of pregnancy into a tradable service. And right here, you can see that global market in action. It's a clear tier system. You've got the gold standard in the US, which is super expensive but legally very secure. Then you've got these emerging hubs like Colombia or Georgia, where it's much, much cheaper. And that price difference is what drives that regulatory arbitrage we were just talking about. The money just flows to the path of least resistance, both legally and financially. But it turns out this market is incredibly fragile. For a long time, Ukraine was the global hub for affordable surrogacy, while the 2022 invasion threw that entire system into absolute chaos. It forced the whole industry to pivot almost overnight to new reproductive havens. It's a stark reminder of just how vulnerable these new global supply chains for human life really are.
So if you think of surrogacy as the hardware that lets you outsource gestation, then genomics is the software. We're moving beyond just assisting reproduction to actively enhancing it. And believe me, this is where things start to feel like they're straight out of science fiction.
The engine driving all of this is the absolutely mind-blowing collapse in the cost of sequencing a human genome. I mean, look at this timeline. It goes from $100 million down to a projected price of less than $100. That's one of the most incredible price drops in history, way faster than even Moore's Law. And when sequencing a genome costs less than ordering a nice dinner, it stops being a medical procedure and starts becoming a routine data set.
And once you have that data, you can do this: polygenic embryo screening, or PGTP. Let me break it down. Basically, you create a bunch of embryos using IVF. You sequence all of their genomes. Then you use that data to calculate genetic scores for all sorts of complex traits, everything from disease risk to cognitive ability. You rank the embryos, and then you select and implant the optimized one. You're no longer just hoping for a healthy baby, you are actively selecting the best possible baby from the options you have.
Now, the science here is still debated, but some estimates suggest that selecting the best embryo out of a batch of 10 could give you a gain of about 3 IQ points. Now, that might not sound like a lot for one person, but imagine applying that across an entire population over generations. The compounding effects on society could be absolutely massive, and this, of course, is where the debate gets incredibly intense.
Which brings us to, really, the biggest question of them all. What happens when these technologies become common? We could be looking at a new and maybe much deeper form of inequality, one that's not written in laws or bank accounts, but in our very own genetic code.
The debate around this stuff creates a whole new political axis that just scrambles our old ideas of left and right. On one side, you have the bioconservatives, and this is a really strange mix of people, from religious conservatives who see the genome as sacred to secular progressives who fear a new kind of eugenics. And on the other side, you've got the bioliberals or transhumanists. These are the libertarians and techno-optimists who argue that enhancing ourselves is a fundamental right, maybe even a moral duty.
And here's the thing. Because there's no global government that can enforce a single set of rules, the inevitable result is genetic tourism. It's the exact same pattern we saw with surrogacy. Wealthy people will just travel from countries with strict laws to permissive genetic havens to get these procedures done. It means that access isn't going to be decided by some global ethical debate. It's just going to be decided by the size of your bank account.
And this table kind of lays out the potential endgame, a 3-phase path to what you could call biological stratification. We're in phase 1 right now. The wealthy can get access, but the gains are pretty marginal. But as the tech gets better, allowing selection from thousands of potential embryos, well, that's when a real statistical divergence could start. The ultimate fear is that by the middle of this century, we could face a permanent genetic caste system where inequality is literally hard-coded into our DNA.
Which leaves us with this one final profound thought. For all of human history, life has been shaped by the lottery of birth. But we are very, very quickly entering an era where that lottery is being replaced by the investment strategy of birth. So the question is no longer if this is going to happen, but who's going to get to write the code for the next generation of humanity, and what happens next?